Your mind is exhausted, not because something terrible has happened, not because you are in danger, just because you woke up, checked your phone, and the day began. The low hum of worry was already there before breakfast. The comparison, the self-criticism, the loop of thoughts that refuses to stop. You have probably tried to fix it. You have journaled, meditated, optimized your morning routine, downloaded another app, and still the noise continues. Here's something worth considering. 2,000 years ago, a former slave sat in a small room in ancient Greece and wrote about exactly this feeling. He described a mind that torments itself over things it cannot change. A mind that creates suffering not from circumstances alone, but from the stories it tells about those circumstances. His name was Epictetus. He had been enslaved, physically disabled, and owned by people with absolute power over his life. And yet, he concluded that the most dangerous prison a person can inhabit is not built from iron or stone. It is built from thought. You may have been asking the wrong question about your mental health. The question is usually, how do I feel better? The question the ancient philosophers asked was different. They asked, what is the mind actually doing and why? The Stoic philosophers believed that human suffering arises not from events themselves, but from judgments made about those events. Marcus Aurelius, who was Roman emperor during a period of plague, war, and personal loss, wrote in his private journal that you have power over your mind, not outside events. He was not offering optimism. He was making a precise philosophical claim. Between what happens to you and how you respond, there is a gap. Inside that gap is everything. Modern cognitive behavioral therapy, one of the most evidence-supported psychological treatments available today, is built on a structurally similar idea. The psychologist Aaron Beck, who developed it in the 1960s, identified that depression and anxiety are maintained not by circumstances alone, but by automatic patterns of thought. The Stoics had named this territory nearly 2,000 years earlier. Epictetus taught a distinction that sounds simple, but is genuinely difficult to practice. He divided all of human experience into two categories, things within your control and things outside it. Within your control, your judgments, your intentions, your responses, your values. Outside your control, other people's opinions, the weather, your body's health, your reputation, the past, the future. His argument was that most human anxiety is generated by directing enormous mental energy at the second category while neglecting the first. You lie awake worrying about whether someone likes you, whether you made the right decision 5 years ago, whether tomorrow will go well. None of these are within your control, and yet they dominate the internal landscape. This is not an instruction to become emotionally cold or to pretend hardship does not hurt. Epictetus was not teaching detachment from life. He was teaching discernment. There is a difference between caring about something and tying your psychological stability to an outcome you cannot guarantee. Seneca, the Stoic writer and political advisor, was deeply interested in what we would now recognize as anxiety about the future. He noticed that the mind tends to rehearse disasters that never arrive. People suffer, he wrote, in imagination more than in reality. He was describing what psychologists today call anticipatory anxiety, the way the threat detection system of the brain generates fear about hypothetical futures with the same intensity it would generate about real and immediate danger. Seneca's prescription was not positivity, it was examination. When the fear arrives, look at it directly, name it, ask what is actually likely. Ask what you would do if the feared thing happened, not to eliminate fear, but to reduce its power to run unchallenged through the mind. Now consider a different tradition, The Epicureans are often misunderstood. The word Epicurean today suggests luxury, indulgence, the finest food and wine. But Epicurus himself lived simply and taught that the path to psychological well-being runs not through the accumulation of pleasure, but through the reduction of unnecessary desire. He called the goal ataraxia, a Greek word meaning tranquility or freedom from mental disturbance, not excitement, not achievement, not admiration, quiet. Epicurus observed something that sounds almost like a description of modern life. He noticed that people pursue intense pleasures believing they will produce lasting satisfaction, and then are surprised when the satisfaction dissolves almost immediately and the hunger returns. He was describing what psychologists today call the hedonic treadmill, the documented tendency for humans to return to a relatively stable baseline of well-being, regardless of positive or negative changes in circumstances. Getting the promotion, the relationship, the house. The feeling passes faster than expected, and then the wanting begins again. Epicurus did not conclude that pleasure is bad. He concluded that the wrong kind of pleasure, one that agitates the mind, creates dependency, or requires constant external conditions to maintain, produces more suffering than it relieves. The pleasures he recommended were modest, friendship, conversation, simple food, time to think, rest without guilt. He would have looked at a world of infinite digital stimulation, overnight delivery, and constant comparison, and said this is not an environment designed for a calm mind. This is an environment designed to keep desire permanently unsatisfied.
There is something important in that observation. Modern anxiety is not simply a chemical imbalance or a character flaw. It is partly a reasonable response to an unreasonable environment. The human nervous system was not built for the scale of information, comparison, threat signals, and social performance that contemporary life demands. Ancient philosophers could not have known about dopamine or cortisol, but they understood that the conditions of a society shape the interior life of the people within it. They understood that a culture obsessed with status, speed, and acquisition would produce particular kinds of suffering. Buddhism, though originating in South Asia rather than Greece or Rome, developed alongside these traditions and arrived at remarkably similar conclusions about the mind. The Buddha identified craving and aversion as the twin engines of psychological suffering. The mind clings to what it wants and resists what it fears. In doing so, it is almost never fully present. It is either reaching forward into an imagined future or pulling backward into a reconstructed past. This observation connects directly to what psychologists and neuroscientists have found about the default mode network, the system in the brain that activates when you are not focused on a task and which is associated with mind-wandering, rumination, self-referential thought, and in excess with depression and anxiety. A study by Matthew Killingsworth and Daniel Gilbert, published in 2010, found that people spend roughly half their waking hours thinking about something other than what they are actually doing, and that this mind-wandering is associated with lower reported happiness regardless of what they are actually doing. A mind-wandering mind is an unhappy mind, they wrote. Buddhist meditative practice, developed over centuries, is essentially a training in returning attention to the present moment before the mind carries you elsewhere. Mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, now widely used in clinical settings, draws directly from this tradition. Socrates offers a different angle entirely. He was not primarily interested in calming the mind. He was interested in examining it. His central conviction was that the unexamined life is not worth living. This sounds like an intellectual position, but in psychological terms, it points towards something clinically significant. Socrates believed that most human suffering comes from confused beliefs, beliefs people hold without having examined whether they are actually true. You believe you are worthless if you are not productive. You believe you must be liked by everyone to be safe. You believe that failure defines you permanently. Socrates would have sat with you and asked, very quietly, "Is that actually true? How do you know? What would count as evidence against it?" This is the practice that psychologists call Socratic questioning. It is a core technique in cognitive behavioral therapy and was named directly after the philosopher. The therapist does not tell the patient that their belief is wrong. They ask questions that allow the patient to examine the belief themselves and discover its weaknesses from the inside. Socrates understood something essential. You cannot argue someone out of a deeply held belief, but you can invite them to look at it carefully, and sometimes the looking is enough. It would be dishonest, however, to present ancient philosophy as a complete solution to modern mental health. These traditions were developed by and largely for educated men in societies where structural suffering, poverty, enslavement, illness, discrimination was often invisible in the philosophical framework. Telling someone in genuine crisis to simply examine their judgments or to practice detachment can be harmful if it substitutes for professional care. Philosophy does not treat clinical depression. It does not resolve trauma. It does not address the neurological complexity of conditions like bipolar disorder, OCD, or psychosis. A person in serious distress needs support that philosophy alone cannot provide. What philosophy can offer is something adjacent to that care. It can offer a framework for understanding why the mind behaves as it does. It can offer practices for working with thoughts rather than being swept away by them. It can offer a reminder that the struggle you are experiencing is not a personal failure or a modern invention. It is the oldest condition of being human. Every generation has faced a restless mind, a fear of death, a hunger for meaning, a difficulty being present. Every generation has needed to find a way to live inside that condition without being destroyed by it. The ancient philosophers were not therapists, but they were paying close attention to the same mind you are living inside now. And some of what they noticed, written in cramped rooms, in occupied cities, in exile, in captivity, still lands with the precision of something true. Your mind is exhausted, not because you are broken, because you are human, and humans have always needed to learn, slowly and imperfectly, how to carry that mind a little more lightly.